far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session. And it's Happy International Women's Day to everybody that is here participating with us, and we greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to go without further ado to two dynamic women that we have. This conversation is going to be very, very good. I'd like for you to learn and understand and know Miss Brittany Amafa, and correct me if I'm saying that incorrectly. So you take the floor.
Hi, everybody. Yes, my name is Brittany Andrew Mulfa. I'm very excited and honored to be here. I imagine this is where I just speak really briefly about who I am. So currently, I'm a policy consultant. I have worked about a decade in previous policy roles, which I will elaborate on as time goes on in this webinar. I'm also a woman in business. I hold a bachelor's in honors in social policy and equity studies from York University. as well as a master's degree in political management from Carleton University. So I definitely spent a good amount of time in the political Ottawa bubble, which I'll get to elaborate on as time during this webinar as well. Since then, I've gone on to apply my education in various business endeavors. I've also most recently launched my own policy consulting firm, and I currently work as well in the field of health and fitness. Previously, I was the manager of policy and research at the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, as well as a senior policy analyst at the Broadband Institute.
Very good. So a wide breadth of knowledge and experiences and expertise that you have, right? So good. We'll delve a little bit more into it as we go through our conversation today. And next with us, we have Dr. Karine Coyne Sanchez. Welcome. And let everyone know who you are.
Hi, my name is Dr. Corinne Cohen Sanchez. I'm an author, international scholar, and also consultant that does specialize in social consciousness, identity, and power within institutions and within the transnational context. My work basically bridge sociology, political policy, diaspora studies, and equity-focused research all together in how awareness and culture and resistance shape the lived experiences and what are the collective outcomes of those things. And yeah, that's it.
Very good. Welcome, welcome. Well, ladies, with regards to the topic, right, with public policy and governance and how it is impacted, but let's just lead out with that. So, Dr. Sanchez, we'll start with you in the sense, what is public policy, right? We hear this term thrown out, people aren't really sure, but what does public policy mean? What does it entail from your perspective?
When I think, see this unmute button and mute button. When I think of policy, I think of specific rules, guidelines, and actions that are created to address a specific issue. So in this context, it could be translated into law, regulation, internal policy, programs, things that we see in our everyday world. So what does it mean in terms in contrast to governance? Governance is more of a reference to the system itself and how the structure and the processes are used to make these decisions and oversee how power and authority are exercised. So they do complement each other, but they both serve separate purposes.
And Brittany, your take, how do you see it?
Mhm. Absolutely. So, public policy essentially is the rules that make up the society that we live in. They govern how we interact with systems. They are the rules that impact how governments make their decisions and also the decisions that come out of government, but also rules that impact the way we interact with each other. Social policy is a huge aspect of public policy. And as we know, social policy are basically the social supports and larger systemic sort of governing body that kind of outlines how we support one another, what systems or services are available to the public. And then, of course, what are the financial sort of what finances, sorry, do we need to ensure that these systems remain long lasting?
Okay, so with that then, how does someone get into public policy? Right? Now that we've kind of given the general overview of public policy and governance and what it looks like, we'll get into the niche aspects as to the different categories of what can be undertaken when you look into that field. But where do we go with public policy? Right? So Brittany, you can lead in with that. What do we do with it? How do we utilize it?
Absolutely. Well, first, I'd like to begin that my desire to be in public policy first started in community work. So, working alongside members of the community, working in social services, community programs, etc. It was then that I started to think through some of the bigger picture questions. How does a community idea get started in the first place? How does one get funded? What are some of the changes that we could be making within community? And how do those changes happen? And that's when I started to go on the path of thinking through more, what does this all entail? And it led me to public policy. It led me to governance and government largely or at large. And the reason why is because when we think about our political system, our governance system, those are the places where change and or decisions are made in our legislatures across the country, federal, provincial, as well as municipal. And of course, the people who head those legislatures are our political actors, whether they may be councillors, provincial legislators, whether it's MPPs or MLAs, or an MP, whether it's on the federal level. So I started to interrogate those questions a little bit more, followed me down a trail of there's a whole sort of ecosystem of individuals, particularly working professionals who are actively working to influence public policy. Now, there are various ways that you can influence public policy. One is through working as a policy analyst, working in the legal realm, but there are other ways too that I know we'll explore a little bit more in this panel. But that essentially is what public policy is, or how I was led into this path was thinking through how can I be a part of making bigger decisions in this country, decisions that impact people who look like me or impact people who I felt or have been proven to be quite marginalized or disenfranchised, or people who did not have a voice in our political system.
Hmm. And so, Dr. Sanchez, when with hearing that, so like, how can we better reflect the lived experiences, right? We talk about Black and racialized people per se. What is required? What's needed?
Just to backtrack a little bit,
Sure.
what got my interest for the concept of policy itself is not seeing my lived realities in the policies. And I can use a basic example in terms of how knowledge influences policy. And the knowledge that was influencing the policy was not reflective of the collective. It was reflective of the normative, of the prototypes. So that is what created this resistance. And this is a form of resistance when we get involved in policy because it becomes an inconvenience for the mass. So whenever we get involved in situations like that, it's something that we question. And when we question, it becomes a problem. So to answer the question, how can we how can policies better reflect our experiences is to never accept what is presented as truth of reality. That is not your truth of reality. It is what was standardized as truth of reality. So in order to resist, you have to get yourself involved in some shape or form. In order for it to better reflect rationalized women or Black women in institution, we have to move beyond symbolic consultation, performative actions. We have to instead try to integrate what lived experiences into the design and evaluation of policy framework. A basic example that I can use that just happened recently is the school curriculums. For example, at the university level, there was never a section in any of the any of the syllabus that are presented to students that say where they can go if they experience racism. Whereas there was a whole bunch of sections about accommodation for mental health, there was a whole bunch of section accommodation for learning disabilities, but there was nothing that point to where you can go and advocate if you experienced racism in the classroom, whether it be through a peers or whether I advocated to have that encouraged to have that in the syllabus for professors to use. That in itself is a change of policy. We might not view it, we might always view things at the larger level, but that is a grassroots change. And when I say grassroots change, there are people that experience racism in the classroom, and it can be done through your peers and it can be done from a professor. If you don't recognize that in the syllabus, how are you even making visible something that they try to make invisible in the process of learning? So too often policies processes rely on abstract data while overlooking the everyday realities that shape how policies are actually made within communities.
And to your point, a lot of when it pertains to when the Black community, a lot of the data is what's used as the pause, right? The consistent statements of we need to collect more data, even though you have institutional data and demographical data out the wazoo for decades upon decades that have not shifted nor changed, right? So, bringing it back to when we deal with those parts. So yes, people think about the macro, right, rather than some of the micro aspects of policy. We're thinking of the big legislative policies that impact from drive-in, housing, that type of aspect. But yes, procedures and dealing with school boards, right? The PPMs, those aspects that deal with your everyday operation and what you're dealing with in your work environment is very, very important in order to impact that. So coming around to then, let's talk about so then the external stakeholders, right? The private individuals, the community organizers and organizations who can affect change. If we look at previously the 50s and the 60s with the civil rights movement and where we see the greatest dynamic of change, right? With the civil rights movement, the voting rights, etc., with integration, all of that. We are at a point in 2026, and let me ask you, how do you see the Black community and Black women's role with change? Are we affecting change? I see data has been put into the chat with regards to, Statistics Canada. But from a larger perspective, what is your understanding? Have we made gains? Have we regressed? Are we at a standstill, or is it because the newer generation is not making themselves be informed? So Dr. Sanchez, I'll start with you, and then Brittany, I'll let you follow up.
So your question is multi-layered. We have to first, if I start with the micro analysis, we have to first examine what does blackness mean in Canada if we're focusing in the region of the Canadian region. There is a huge absentee, like a sort of absence of what blackness is. It's very, very unusual for someone to be referred to as a Black Canadian. They need an entire lineage for you to justify what you mean when you say Black Canadian. Whereas in the States, that identity has already been celebrated, it has been accepted, it's part of the culture. In Canada, we haven't even begun that step. Blackness in itself here is very invisible. And when it's accepted within certain parameters, whether we're conscious or not conscious of it, it's within a parameters of white supremacy. What I mean by that is it will be celebrated for Caravana, it will be celebrated for certain things that are entertaining. But when it comes to creating the systematic changes that are needed, there's always the resistance that 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 it, that accompanies it. That does not negate the fact that we have not progressed. I would not say that we have not progressed. In fact, I say the fact of us being here and having this conversation on this platform is a reflection of the progression that we've done. Where it's not going to mirror the Americans and how they fight social justice. It's going to mirror how Canadians fight social justice. And this is why I always say it's very polite in the approach. Is that the right approach? I don't know if that's the correct approach or not. But I find it is very polite and very slow in the reaction because it's complying with the culture that is associated with what is blackness in Canada and what is acceptable behavior when you're trying to confront a systematic issue. In the Canadian culture, there's this undertone of wanting to be polite. And as soon as you go derive or you deviate from what is considered politeness, you become a problem. Whereas in the
Mhm.
American society, when you're vocal and you advocate, you're praised. So there's a social component to it. But I will let my colleague, Brittany, uh, voice her opinion as well.
Thank you. You raised such strong points, Dr. Corinne. I first want to ask, what changes are we looking for? So I think over the years we've lost the question to the answer. So getting really focused on what are we seeking to change, what is the problem, and what solutions are we looking to put forward? Now, if we're looking for changes in the education system, getting very specific there, are we looking about increasing graduation rates? Are we talking about improving student experience? Are we talking about preventing streaming? Are we referring to interpersonal interactions between the educator and the student? So those are particular questions that we need to ask and get a little bit more detailed in what we are attempting to change. And that's what policy does, really. It's asking questions around a particular problem and seeking to unpack and learn more about the particular problem, and then engaging in a set of processes and a set of uh, research and action items to then put forward solutions. If we're talking about racism in society, are we referring to a lack of access to employment opportunities? Are we talking about interpersonal relationships between colleagues in the workplace? And of course, we can talk about healthcare, access to our various aspects of our healthcare system. And then lastly, we can talk about housing and housing discrimination, which we're all very much aware of. Can people find a place to live? And who are the landlords? Who's allowed to be, or who has been enabled to be a landlord? And then, of course, what are the laws and policies put in place to maybe one, help prevent evictions, even though there's been so many talks about eviction fraud, there's still an aspect, particularly as it relates to racialized folks who are getting evicted without just cause. Or, of course, what policies do we put in place to allow for a much more sustainable form of housing, right? Whether that's a pathway to home ownership or whether that's putting in new rental laws, stabilization laws. So again, it's seeking to figure out what the problem is we're looking to solve, what changes are we looking to seek, and then how we would get there. I do want to draw on Dr. Corinne's point very quickly on what is Blackness in Canada. So, of course, we have a very different migration pattern as it relates to Black people and their existence here in Canada. We are still, and not to say that this immigration pattern doesn't exist in the state, but we still have a larger sect of Black people who have more recently migrated, let's say in the last 30 years, 40 years, etc. So that's still quite a new population of Black people in Canada, right? And of course, we have Black people have been here since slavery for hundreds of years in this country. And of course, they have formed their own identity. Now, as it relates to Canada, because of this lack of a unifying sort of Black population, there are segments of Black people that have self-identified. And through this self-identification, it has presented some challenges, but it also has presented some opportunities to better understand the Black experience. Whether you're from the continent, whether you're from like recently migrated from Africa, whether you've been in Canada for centuries, or whether you've migrated from the Caribbean, there's a different migration story. And that's why it's really important, as Dr. Corinne has said, to be a part of the policy evaluation process so that these stories and that these collective experiences can be a part of policy decisions moving forward.
Very good. And if we think about that though, part of the issues we don't, as someone said a while back, we're getting caught up on the wrong things, right? When we sit and still continue to have the debate about what blackness is, that's when they have already got us, right? If we continue to be, oh, am I African? Am I Caribbean? Am I black is black, right? And then, even the terminology and all of that is being, continually dialogue. We pigeonhole ourselves in a lot of times with regards to, and again, that's that fancifulness in the way of trying to be brought up into the colonialist structure, right? So the being polite, the wanting to follow through, don't want to be the one that's seen as the outcast or the disruptor, and those factors that come into play. But in the sense of then, you brought up several things, Brittany. So when we're talking about education, when we talk about housing, we talk about racism within with which pervades throughout, right? So, but how do we get individuals to get to the policy piece, right? So, I think about my time with Toronto District School Board, the various policy changes that I was able to be a part of. A lot of it is the simple thing of crafting motions, right? Like a lot of people miss out on some of the very simple, basic concept. It's not so highfalutin. It's not so deeply, hidden or entrenched that you can't find it. It takes a lot of reading for some of the points to make sure that you are able to cite back certain information and cross-reference and be able to deal with that. But so given some pointers as to how do we do the general impacts of the policy change? Yes, we know that we have to come together, but what are the main things that people can just simply look at to impact or to start that ball rolling, to be looked at where it gets to a legislature or parliament to be debated upon before it becomes right, if depending on how large or how small scale for dealing with just the city or an institution of learning, where do we go? Um, Brittany, go ahead. You can take it first.
I first, I think it begins with increasing your knowledge. I mean, we all watch the news. I think the news is a regular part of most people's lives. But it's how are we watching the news and how are we consuming the news? For example, again, this is again if we're looking at very beginner steps. If we were to go to CBC News just to find, big picture of what is happening in our country today, or CBC Toronto, we'll get, some larger picture items of the latest news stories. Now, if you were to click the politics section or even the business section, that's when we can start to get a little bit more specific in our search. So the politics section would outline the big news stories of what's happening in our political legislatures, what is being debated, what are some of the top topics. Now, these topics don't steer or direct our own sort of like our own policy or our own desire for policy change, but it helps increase our knowledge on where things are at right now, currently. So just taking that deeper step as it relates to getting into the subtopics of what's happening within our news. I mean, CP24 everywhere, right? Literally. Again, knowing what sort of news outlets, what they do specifically. CP24, GTA based, you're getting sort of municipal news, you'll get some federal, provincial stuff, things that are a bit more um, that would impact the nation or the province at large, but you're not getting into the very specifics. So maybe being a little bit more aware that if they're talking about Mark Carney, right, then okay, this is a federal conversation that's about to happen. How do we take note of what these are and then doing our own deeper research? If we're talking about Doug Ford, which of course very, very popular within our Toronto news landscape. Okay, is he talking about education or healthcare policy? Two of the biggest provincial spending expenditures within our province. Okay, what are the main topics there? Let's dive deeper and let's do a further analysis of how these topics either impact Black people and what their outcomes are, but also more specifically, what are the policies that are in the legislature or the bills that are being put forward, that are being debated in the legislature right now. So it really starts with collecting more information, refining our search, and of course, us using that information to then help dictate what the next steps would be in engaging in a policy change process.
Karen?
I would start first by observing because there's a huge gain when we sit back and we observe a trend. And the trend, it could be something as who makes up the majority of higher administrators in an institution, and why? And why are the visible minorities, the women of color, make up a certain trend in the hierarchy of hiring processes? Once we start observing that, then we can delve deeper and understand what is going on with the sustainability and the retention in that specific region, whether it be school, whether it be employment, whether it be the healthcare system. I wrote numerous papers on factors like this. You can obtain data. The data gives you support in what the claims we've been saying for years. But if we don't put forward actions that are implemented through policy and governance, it's meaningless. So I would start first by observing and then creating small changes at the grassroots. Because sometimes people see policy and governance as something that's unattainable when it's very much attainable. You can make simple changes by creating changes in your collective agreement. And Yvette, you made an excellent point, creating motions through your union if they have annual get-togethers. These might be meaningless to someone, but they could be meaningful for someone else. And I'll give a recent example. There was a motion that I brought forward years ago about economic sustainability. Everybody that was attending certain conferences assumed to have a credit card. We're assuming that everyone has credit cards. And we're assuming that these people who have credit cards have space to put in $300-400 deposit when they go to hotels, when they go to conferences. That's an assumption that you made. And what that leads when you make these assumptions is that you are catering to a certain status of people. That in itself is discriminatory. And until we observe who's always attending the same places, why this is how I came forward. I said, why is it always the same people attending these conferences? You're telling me out of everyone that there's no Black women involved or there's no rationalized people of color? And again, this is not making an assumption that people of color have less of accessibility economically, but you don't know their situation. And what is the barriers? This could have been one of the barriers that could have been a factor that's preventing them from engaging. Bringing forward that motion created that specific union to make an accommodation section for people to come. And then I saw a whole bunch of different faces that attended these conferences. Is this lead of social way of assuming that everyone lives the life that you think that they live in? Until we observe and we start understanding the various trends that are existing within our community, then we can start deconstructing to reconstruct.
Yeah.
And that can be done in very simple ways. It can be emotion, it can be changing language in your collective agreement, it can be contacting uh, a professor or a teacher, whatever situation you're in.
Very true. And same thing with our union, right? Because that's something that we picked up on very quickly, with regards to the aspect of, credit. If we have that conversation, right, as to what is required, what's needed to be put down to everything that you had just noted. Um, when we consider dealing with public policy in that, what's required? So to get into the career, right? What's required? Brittany?
Great question, because this has been something that I've learned over time, and I've had to dedicate some thinking and resourcing to better understand what are the requirements for me to, one, be an expert in this field, but also to have a long-lasting career. So I'd like to, of course, we have Dr. Kranier, who does have her PhD, assumed expert naturally because of the work, time, and dedication that she's put into specifically studying an area of research that, of course, enters it into academia and has immense influence. I happen to have a master's degree, a PhD, fingers crossed, will be in my horizon. But I first want to start off with basically understanding or having, formal education in some sort of public policy degree. Of course, more and more university degrees are not as applicable to the workforce, and there's many, many, many reasons. But fundamentally, policy is a knowledge-based career field. You need to know and understand the various aspects of the public policy process as it relates to in Canada, but also public policy issues. You need to know what the issues are. You need to have the history and understanding of these issues, how they played out in previous times, and how they operate today in contemporary times. So you need that knowledge, and actually undergoing formal study to acquire that knowledge is necessary. Lastly, to add to that, of course, the higher you go in your formal education, the stronger your thinking should develop. Your critical thinking skills, your analysis skills, your evaluation skills, your research process skills, etc. That all should be a part of your formal education. Then there are the other skills, and these are organizational skills. These are time management skills. These are being able to understand project development from implementation to the action phase. These are data analytical skills, really understanding data, how to use it correctly, data ethics, and of course, how do you apply data to your work? As we know, data tells a story. So these hard skills are really essential to staying within the field. It's one thing to be sort of a knowledge hub. You have all this information in you and you're just bursting from the seams to get it out there and act. But then you need to also combine that education and that knowledge with some of the hard skills for it to be applicable. So again, data analytics, organizational skills. And it's just not even about like putting in a calendar. We all can put a calendar invite and send one out. It's really, how do you organize a project and how do you get something from implementation or inception, really idea, to again to the outcome or action stage. And of course, it's really understanding who exists in this field. And it's not about increasing your network. Of course, everybody would love more visibility because more visibility can mean more influence. It's about understanding who the various actors are and what do they do. So that should also be a part of your knowledge acquisition.
Acquisition that you have, right? Okay. So jumping from that then, Dr. Sanchez, when we think about then how do we what are the changes that are needed, right? When we think about the leadership and advocacy for Black women, from understanding that component in this public policy sphere, what do we need to do? What more do we need to either enhance or enrich? What is required?
to ensure that you guys can hear me clearly, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, good. I just double check because sometimes my sound cuts off. So to ensure that lived experiences are reflected in policy, from leadership to advocacy of rationalized women, it needs to translate into real policies. And that policy an institution must address the structural dynamics that are often limited to how leadership recognizes and operationalizes. So in many government environment, rationalized women contribute significantly already through expertise, through advocacy, through the insights. They're frequent filtered through institutional norms that prioritize traditional forms of authority and knowledge. So one important change to strengthening institutional accountability for inclusion in government, this would include decision-making structures where rationalized women hold meaningful roles in policy development, advisory bodies and leadership positions, not symbolic. Like I mentioned, they have to be not, it's not black faces in high places. It's about having the option to administer these changes and be provided with the support. Second, institutions must examine how organizational cultures and informal norms shape whose knowledge is considered credible. This is a very important point, and I had a lecture on who determines what credibility is. And a lot of these factors play in how we impose our positionalities in certain structures. Many research has shown that systematic barriers often operate through sublet mechanism, like I mentioned earlier, in which I make reference to something I call polite racism. Thus, expectation is they determine what's considered professional, civility, or institutionally fit. That can minimize the contribution of rationalized leaders. So there has to be a strong pathways in connecting advocacy, research, and policy implementation together. So the insight and the leadership of rationalized women has to be embedded in the institutional processes. And that can be done through community. That can be done through implementing advisory committees, policy task force, government reform. Their perspective can move from margins of advocacy into centers of policy decision making. But at the end of the day, real influence emerges when institutions are willing to rethink how knowledge and leadership and authorities are structured within government systems.
So, all very valid points. So let me just play a little bit of
Devil advocates. Go
All
right
right. So
ahead.
when we look at what has happened since the George Floyd era, and we had the whole influx of the new EDI positions and DEI, whichever terminology you want to utilize in this framework of it, people, culture, and belonging, et cetera, et cetera. We've had a multitude, and for the most part, it has been black women over black men, but we know it's mainly been white women who have taken on those positions and roles and still hold them for the most part. But the opportunity was there, right? We had individuals who became leads, directors, EDs, right? All chief operation officers, etc. Let's run the gamut of all the titles that are out there. And yet, here we sit in 2026 when the aspects of, policy, governance, and being able to aid us, and with all the points that you just said. So if I go to Brittany, if I run the litany of what you just went through about skill sets, knowledge, critical thinking, right? Boom, boom. And if when we look at the CV, because if you're at that point, you're not at a resume anymore, you're a CV'd individual. So we run the CV and yet we don't have change. So Karina comes back
Yeah,
to you that yes, we're within institutions of racism that put
yeah,
forward the obstacles.
yeah,
But when does it become we as the black individual step outside of ourselves for the greater good? And for me, that becomes where the greatest problem because I always take the hits, which isn't a problem. Shoulder broad and Jamaican, whatever. We need. I think I was born in the wrong era per se, right? Me and Malcolm would have been great friends. But the aspect is just the point of what what are we missing? So I'm kind of still circling back, right? Because I'm not one to be on the negative Betty because I don't
yeah,
believe that. I believe we were in a stalemate right now. We have regressed, and I feel that we're ready to spring back forward. How are we going to affect those changes, Karine? Like you were valid points. You and I basically probably on some of the key aspects, but in understanding and knowing the policies and governance and the nuanced pieces of the racism that is the undercurrent of where you sit with power, how, when you're in these positions of power, should you appropriately be navigated? And sorry to take on, but I think some people also think that they're going to sit in the seat of power forever rather than look at it that, listen, I have a year and that should be my mindset. My contract says 3 years, but this year, I'm just gonna run through everything, right? But go ahead, whoever's gonna take
No,
the line.
I'm eye to eye with what you're saying, and I've said this in many different formats. There's this, so there's two components. You have to create your community, and there are people that will provide you with the support at these high places. If you choose not to create the community out of fear, that's on you. And there's a sense of accountability. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We got there. That doesn't mean it ends there. Just because we got there does not end there. We still have to pass the baton and help because we got there for a reason. Somebody created the space. So to go back, Yvette, to when they had the whole joy floored and everybody was a reawakening when it came to racism in Canada and everybody was compliant and everybody wanted to help. There was also a situation of retention that's not discussed. They were hired, but were they retained in the position? So statistically, it might look good on paper that yes, we hired X amount of black professors or X amount of black whatever sector you're in, but I don't know if they were retained. We don't have data if the retention was there because there's a huge lack of support and there's a burden when you hold a position as a black person of in a higher learning or higher position. They expect you to do all the work. So this is why I say community is important. You can form your community, but you have to be strategic in forming your community. Not everybody's going to be your friend, but if you're wise and you're able to see and strategize on how you can momentum, gain the momentum to create systematic change. And it can be done at a very, very, very low level. Like I said, creating a motion, changing a policy, creating language that reflects lived realities in the policy. I had to fight to get the word racism in the policy at an institution that I was in because they say that it goes hand in hand with discrimination. I said it's not the same.
Yeah.
You can't intertwine the two. Don't do that because what you're doing is that you're silencing the voice of an entire community who is facing racism by saying that discrimination complements it. So identifying is one aspect. Forming a community is another aspect, but it's possible
And
because
to your point,
it's possible.
yeah, and to your point, because when TDSB was doing the equity framework, I forced them to make sure to go out, do the research. So now ABR, so anti-Black racism, is included along with other anti-racist framework of oppression, etc., to break it down. It is in their equity policy, right? So it's not as if it can't be looked at. Same thing with lateral violence, which another conversation to be had. But Brittany, give me your perspective here.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, this is such a big question. I first want to start off by saying, from my observations, lived experiences, as well as the experiences of others, there are competing interests. The competing interests are between economic security when you do get into these positions, even though it's perceived economic security. It may say if you're in there for a contract, it may be that on paper. But on the ground, it could be a very different thing. So it's like when you get in there, what is the game plan? What's the action plan? So between economic security and then, of course, seeking change and or challenging the system. The two can often be opposing. To be able to occupy a seat that allows you to have both, I think that is where things become a little bit more rare. And of course, begs the question a bit more around the desire for entrepreneurial roles that it can exist within organizations or that you create for yourself. So that already is very challenging. So how do we provide that sense of cushion, And this again could be through governance changes, it could be through the realm of community, which maybe people don't realize the importance of having that community when you get into these spaces, because these are the people that you often will draw from for support or seek guidance from, who maybe could even fight on your behalf and vocalize things that are happening that you may not necessarily be able to. So having that source of community is really key. This is also why I'm a huge champion for, education and acquiring education and or the skills that if you did need to pivot or if you do need to seek another employment opportunity because of the desire to seek that change and to challenge the system, you do have the skills to do so. And again, that goes beyond having a degree that is very knowledge-based, but practical skills that allow you to seek other employment opportunities within our existing economy.
But even with that, and I'm going to get to one of our questions that we have from Norma in a minute there, but again, we are one of the most educated and degreed groups of people, Black women, right? And Black people as a whole. And we're not going to leave out our Black men, right? We are at least 2 to 3 times more educated than our peer or our colleague. So it isn't the question of that. What I will say though, you are correct about being informed. A lot of the times we're not being informed, and that's doing the research and the reading and gathering the information to appropriately, bring the groups together that you need to help champion and back you. And then sometimes you have to just go that fight, understanding that your time is an optimal time to try to affect change. And your point, economic security, I understand that very much. So right now I'm in the perils of it at the moment, but it's you still got to walk a path of saying that if we're about social justice and change, if we are looking at how the systems are being barriers to our children, to our people, to the process of even job employment, job security, then we need a few people to be the ones that take the hits. So even
Let
if
me
I
let me just jump in, Yvette. Sorry,
go ahead.
because education is one aspect, but we have to create space.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about that aspect of creating space. So when I'm in a situation where I have hiring privileges or I can do a workshop, I will make sure that I ensure that my people are involved in this process. And this is the other issue that we have to work within ourselves. We assume that because we've obtained a position that, and we are very insecure because we've obtained this position, because there's so little of us in these higher positions, that we want to hold on to it like this precious thing, and then we become so selfish and consumed with that. Yes, it could be a reflection of security, but it's also a reflection of the fact this is a historical reflection that there's such little space available for Black leadership that when we get it, we tend to forget to create space for people. That is accountability, and that's responsibility that we need to put onto ourselves. So
Mhm.
education is great. I have the highest. I have 5 degrees. That's beautiful. Okay, yes. That does not negate the fact that I have a responsibility, which is a social one, to create space. If I have a workshop and I have the means to hire somebody, I'm hiring a Black person to have the conversation. If I'm having guest lectures, I'm getting a Black guest lecturer to come and have a conversation. We have to be mindful that we have to create space. The same way that somebody created it for us to be in these positions, we have to hold ourselves accountable to create the space for the next generation. And that can be
Right.
done in so many different facets. And I'll just be quiet in a second. I do an annual award ceremony, okay, for the youth. And this in itself creates a sense of pride, and it's for Black and racialized youth. And it's everybody wins. This is the idea. The idea is to create space.
Yeah. No, very true. Don't worry. Keep you when you're ready. I'll come in when you have.
I saw something pop up. I was
But
like, oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. But the thing is like, and that's it to
and
Norma's question that Norma has put forward. So Black organizations who really don't make space or aren't really championing, and it really hurts my heart. And I don't know if you guys have paid attention because I'm like, when you talk about someone informed, I'm a person that reads, inform, watch, know, attend. So when you try to trick me, it's going to be a little bit hard. You might catch me off guard, but I'll circle back around. But we think about Black when we think about Canadian African Canadian Legal Clinic with Margaret Parsons, right? So here we had a legal organization fighting, setting precedent cases, case law, whatever the issues and the conflicting of personalities, and that we allowed what was one of the premier, like, against any type of organizations across the world doing this work. It dissolved. We created Black through the provincial government and through legal aid, who hasn't done anything, right? They're not doing anything. Nothing is happening. So we again, the policy shift changes, things that should be happening to help our Black youth within the criminal justice system, and champion and fighting for different aspects. It's gone because we are thinking very about ourselves. We're not looking at the bigger picture, the space that supposedly was created. If you look at that organization, the amount of turnover that has happened, that it's so ineffective. It's problematic about not bringing a nexus of people together that can literally really work for the greater good of what we need, right? So, and then I want to just bring up about Black North, and I will take the Black North component of the criticism, because Black North was created to be this large umbrella group that would then go out, work to help and receive this large source of funding, and yet what do we see? Again, where is it that we can turn to for real advocacy, for real activism, which we don't see? There's no activism really, because we have lost the Dudley Laws, the Charlie Roaches, the Louis Marches, right? We still have Valerie, we still have Kingsley, my stuff. Other people are here that are part of that are activists, but what do we need to do in the sense of now with community organizations? What is required within that same space about helping to affect change, right? Because if we see what's there and happening, so if we think of Ontario, the whole aspect about OSAP being sent now to loans rather than grants. We go back to the Bob Rae government, right? Bob Rae, even though people criticize the NDP, that is the government that set forth the OSAP that benefited the majority of us that are Black and racialized to be able to have attended school and be able to get the degrees that we have, and so on. Change has happened. You guys are much younger than I, but right, we have to reflect to see on what's happening, even when we think about on the federal level what's going on with the aspect of supporting the wars or the Palestinian framework. Where are we with the funding for the environmental and the military framework, right? Where are monies being siphoned off where they should be placed into other parts? So community and organizational wise, what do we do to try to prompt them to really start to act? Since now, when we talk about organizations, community, they supposedly should have a collective or at least a group, correct? That's working together. So whomever wants to jump in first.
I'll go really, really quickly, and that's to say, we need more Black-centered spaces to talk, organize, and to. I love how one person put in the chat, we need to know our history. And I think that's also why the fight for Little Jamaica is so crucial. Some may think it's not as significant. It's a small strip on Edmonton West, but it is the preservation of history. And when you have that preservation, it seeps into municipal archives. It seeps into our libraries. It seeps into when we're writing about this place. How are we talking about it? What is the presence there? So preservation of space is really key. Creation and preservation of organization and community groups so you can have conversations. And I would even say, I love the aspect that Dr. Corinne mentioned about self-accountability, right? We often forget we need to hold ourselves accountable when we enter into these spaces. Who are we letting in? What doors are we opening? But what is our succession plan? Just not in that particular professional realm, but for us as individuals, right? Even this space that is being created right now, right? The archiving of our stories, of these talks, having these conversations. How do we individually all enable greater access to that? How do we spread this across our networks? So I think, it's getting back to the basics of organizing, of talking to one another, of creating these groups, fighting for our spaces, creation of new spaces. I mean, I love what Nia, Son of the Arts, is doing. They're really, creating that art and historical space within the city as well, particularly for Black youth. And of course, we always talk about our education system in Ontario. We're in peril, but that's a whole other side conversation. What can we do to not only influence aspects of our education, but create spaces within the largest sort of education body that's influencing our children here today to help create that mindset of in reinforcing identity, understanding who we are as Black Canadians at large, but also encouraging the preservation and creation of Black spaces.
I think to add to that, I think we need to be mindful of um, embracing the youth into the systematic changes we're doing because they will be the leaders of the next generation. If we look at the communities of the youth and bringing them in and showing them what success looks like from a Black lens, because when they go to school, majority of the professors are always white, or if they go to any, if the doctors are mainly white. And this was an observation that was done by my own son when he went to New York. He's like, oh, there's Black doctors. That's odd. You have to bring them into spaces where they see leadership that look like them
And
because
it
it's
comes,
attainable. It's attainable. It's there. It's just so fragmented and spaced out. If we can unite and collectively gain that access to that, whether it's through platforms like this, there's various ways, is to show that it's attainable, it's accessible, it's feasible. Having that sense of pride inside of the youth, the Blackness, but they already are prideful, but even demonstrating the attainability, the role models is another step to it.
yeah, and the way to get them there, like I would normally always hold career fairs, right? In my
There
role
you
of
go.
guidance and as a teacher, I did career fairs, I did job shadowing
Hey,
programs, like way before my time. I said way in the 90s, right? So we've been on the cusp, but again, you have the lack of resourcing within the
yeah,
educational system that doesn't want to fund, but we can still be creative to still do it, right? But it takes people willing to step in and do that with the project management. And it's not even that hard to project manage, and it's not hard to reach out and build relationships. So when you have to do career days, you're drawn from a vast amount of individuals to be present to assist you in getting this done, right? So Brittany, you talked about the historical aspect about knowing your history. We say that, right? Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat. But even acknowledging and recognizing, we don't do it a lot. Like we have a lot of criticism. People will be, oh my gosh, we see Jean again, right? And it's like you're going to see Jean. You will continually see Jean. You will continually see Zanena Conde. You will continually see these ladies that are out there because they are the ones that have been at the forefront. They are the women that have set the path and kicked open the doors for you to move through and to think. They're in their 80s looking fabulous, and they are still at tables of influence and making influence. So, how do we need to really sit back and go, well, what are we doing wrong? Like, it's all great to be, oh, such and such is getting another award. Laud them with the awards. You know why? Because they're still doing the work. They are still the ones that are out there. Well, the rest are still, we still have lots of people doing work, but we have to still make sure we champion that. But if you guys could, who would you like to have a conversation with? Whether someone that from history or present day, which Black individual would you want to sit and have a conversation with? Whether it's to pick their brain or to thank them, tell me, why would you want to be with this individual? Corinne, I'm going to go with you first. I want to hear who you are.
I would want to speak to Dubois, which is the
Ah,
author
okay.
of Double Consciousness. His work influenced a lot of my writing and the way in which I make reference to. I deviate from that, but it was an influential aspect of how I viewed, in which I make reference to duplicity of consciousness when we
Mhm.
migrate to a country, how we have to split ourselves in order to be acceptable. And like I make reference to what's considered credible, and that has an impact on how we behave because our behavior is formatted and is constructed through what is considered acceptable. And it's only within blackness that we see that. We
And
don't
just
what
in case someone isn't aware, you're talking about W.E.B. Du
yes,
Bois.
wait,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. And the next person in line would definitely be Malcolm X. Our birthdays are so close. I can see the connection already, but definitely would be Dubois as the first because the way he was able to analyze that during his time, he was a visionary. He
Yeah.
understood things that we are understanding now. So I give a lot of homage and respect to that.
Very good. Brittany, who do you have?
Thank you so much for this question. I think first I would love to sit down with Angela Davis. She's still alive. She's still
Yeah.
living.
Yes.
But she was definitely extremely influential in starting to understand and inform my own sort of Black womanist thoughts. And just the space she has occupied in academia. And how she's been able to utilize that platform to continue to this day to educate, but also just um, people, politicize people. And I think within a Canadian context, I would actually like to sit down with Mitzi Hunter, former MPP in the Liberal Party. She is now the president of the Canadian Women's Foundation. And the reason why I would like to sit down with her is to better understand her how she became politicized. Of course, prior to being elected, she was a part of Civic Action. I believe she was the president of Civic Action.
Yep.
So I would love to understand a bit more what made her choose political office, why she chose the Liberal Party, what her experiences were like within the political realm, so the provincial Liberal Party. She did not win her seat. It's just the reason why she is not there today. But how that loss was. And of course, how do you balance those sort of political ambitions that she had and that she had for quite some time with her own Blackness? So I'd love to know more.
No, very, very interesting. And yes, and Mitzi is a very nice person. So when we think about our, Black leaders and women, so even from, Selena and her time and that advocacy and that was happening and the conflict and all of that, those are things that are still great for individuals to look at and for our kids. And to Corinne, when you made the point, I think we need to create more conference setups where we do, have conversations with our students about how to look at public policy and change and governance, right? Because to the point, we have a lot of our young Black kids that really are for the change, but just don't know how to implement the change. They're not certain how to gather which information they require. And then you have those that are on point, right? They're extremely astute. They have the great writing ability. They understand policy and utilizing the various, AI and that's required to be able to assist with be able to make these different, programs and fanciful things that look great. But we got to do more to be able to put that forward. Brittany, yep.
Yeah, I just want to say something. I just want to acknowledge quite a bit of people that came on in the last 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm wondering if that was due to the time change. But for those who did, I would encourage you rewatch this conversation. I just want to acknowledge your presence here. And of course, it would have been great to have you from the beginning, but please go back and watch from the beginning.
We touched on a lot of things. That's why you'll see I moved through with what we have here, and we'll go to some questions in a little bit here. The other part then for me is to look at is um, what when we again sitting with the those who have been at the seats of power and where we are. And we know that, Corinne, you had pointed out about making sure that our youth are engaged and have an ability to effectively, demonstrate their competencies and what they want to do. What would you put out there as, give me two things that we can really implement
Mhm,
to one, gather our youth,
mhm.
and two, gather our adults.
We have to start with introducing the concept of your voice matters and stop assuming they need to assume that their voice doesn't matter. They need to be empowered. They need to understand that their voice matters. I've been around youth, I've done workshops, I've done many different forms of interaction with youth, and they always seem to not think that what their experiences is as important. Is reconstructing that language to say your voice matters, even if it's something that is a change with your school council. Run for your school council at their high school. Why are you assuming that you're not going to get it? Why are you assuming that your voice doesn't matter? Somehow, throughout this trajectory of this educational system, in which is very programmed, by the way, because in the educational system itself is structured in a way that presents black as a case, a charity case. It doesn't present blackness as evolutionary or visionary or resilient. That in itself plays in the subconscious mind of the youth. So we can't completely control that aspect, but when we create annual annual celebrations, have workshops, have different forms of interaction with the youth, and having them empowered through understanding that their voice matters. They don't like something with the school. They want to see in the Black history more talk about engineers, doctors, uh, different professionals that influence Canada's history rather than always focusing on slavery. They can do that. They can advocate for that at their school. There's different ways. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that we need to stop being selfish with our gains. We need to expand and create space for everyone to be involved. And just because you've created space doesn't mean yours is lost. There's this subconscious identity that we've attained this certain level of power that it can be shared. It can be shared. You still maintain your space. So creating the space is the fundamental aspect, and encouraging involvement and community involvement is the other component of it, and that can be done through various formats. Sending the message that your voice matters. Your voice matters in every space in which you've occupied. If your body's present, your voice matters, and it
Very
can be
true.
done in a very diligent way. It doesn't need. You don't need. Everybody advocates differently. It doesn't even need to be vocalized. It can be done through writing. It can be done through poetry. It could be done through spoken words. It can be done through fashion. We have to keep in mind that we expressing our resistance or expressing our Black excellence, it can be done in various ways. It does not need to be done with us standing outside and yelling, although
Right.
that does matter, but there's different ways reflecting of your personality,
Many facets.
many
And
facets.
Brittany, well, as we get to your final couple of statements here.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, I think it's important to remember who we are as people. And of course, we come from a variety of different cultures and speak so many languages and have different migration experiences and stories as it relates. We do come from oneness. We all derive from one another. So really understanding who we are people who um, have great respect and honor for our elders and our ancestors, people who have, overcome great adversity and has had tremendous triumphs, a people who, strongly believe in family and community. And we are deeply spiritual, regardless of your religion at your core. So understanding who we are and the presence we bring to this planet and to society at large is extremely important. And once we get back to that understanding of our identity, how our identities are rooted, I think we can begin to rethink ways that we can show up.
Yeah.
And of course, encourage future generations to continue the work.
Ladies, this has been a very, very, very good day. We can keep on going with a whole lot more. I encourage those who are online to stay with us because we do continue the after show conversation for a little bit with you, where you may ask your questions to the ladies in person. And I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to be here with us and to be participating, given the questions and that. Again, happy International Women's Day to you. All the ladies, make sure you're pampering yourself. Make sure you're bigging up yourself for everything you do as a mother, as a sister, as an auntie. Everything that you do is of value and of worth. And remember, you are beautiful, you are thoughtful, you're insightful, and you're intelligent. So walk with your head high, walk proud, and be gracious in everything that you do. Brittany and Corinne, thank you so much for taking time, sharing your expertise, your intellect, your insights with everyone. And we will bid everyone adieu. And for those online, continue to stay with us. Be well, everyone.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. your moment.